The street was quiet enough to hear the electric hum of a single lamppost, its bulb struggling, stuttering in pale flickers. It cast uneven light over a stretch of asphalt lined with shuttered homes and drawn curtains. Lawns trimmed to conformity, mailboxes standing at even intervals, an image of suburban order, as sterile as it was watchful. It was past midnight when silence pressed hardest. When any sound became an intrusion, the captain walked alone. Shoulders squared even in civilian clothes, a posture drilled into muscle memory long before tonight. His jacket was simple, his shoes polished, though unremarkable. In his pocket, the weight of a leather wallet pressed against fabric. Inside it, the folded card, United States Marine Corps, Captain, Active Duty, a badge of service, of belonging. Proof that he had given his body to the nation. Proof that should have been enough. The squad car rolled up behind him, headlights stretching his shadow forward until it dissolved under the flickering lamppost. Tires pressed against the curb with a hiss. A door opened with a sound too abrupt for the silence around it. Evening. The voice was not a greeting. It was a claim, heavy with suspicion before any word of explanation. The captain stopped, turned, hands visible. He had learned the rituals of survival long before Afghanistan, long before command. He had learned them here at home. He straightened but did not challenge. His silence answered more than his voice could. The officer's hand rested on the holster, thumb grazing the snap. The gesture lingered, not yet drawing, but close enough that the intent was declared. His flashlight cut the air like a blade, slicing across the captain's chest, then face, then downward to the ground, as if searching for contraband that was never there. Out late. A statement. Accusatory. The captain nodded once. No defense, no excuse. He let the silence stand, a barrier against escalation. The officer shifted. His boots scraped against pavement. The hand did not move from the holster. The other hand extended, palm open, demanding ID. The captain reached slowly, deliberate, telegraphing every motion like a soldier signaling under fire. From his pocket he drew the wallet, fingers careful not to appear hurried. He flipped it open, revealing the card, the photo, the emblem embossed with authority older and heavier than the man before him. He held it forward. The officer's flashlight paused on the card. For a moment, silence stretched thin enough to snap. The emblem caught the light. A golden eagle, globe and anchor, testimony of service, of sacrifice. Proof of loyalty, but the holster hand did not relax. The officer's jaw tightened. His eyes moved from the badge back to the man, as though service rendered in deserts and jungles meant nothing under the dim pulse of this suburban streetlight. The flicker above buzzed, cut out, returned. Shadows shifted across the captain's face. You people always think... The sentence hung unfinished, not needing completion. The captain's breath slowed. He lowered his gaze, not in submission, but in calculation. Silence again. A choice, a weapon less visible but no less sharp. He had worn silence in ambushes, in waiting for commands, in the spaces between gunfire. Now he wore it as armor. The officer read it differently. He shifted, tensed, hand pressing harder against the holster. The air tightened. The captain lifted his chin just slightly, letting the light strike across his features. No words, only presence. The officer's body moved before his mind caught up. The snap of the holster undone, the arc of steel drawn into the air. A gun's muzzle aligned with the center of a chest that had carried medals, orders, burdens unseen. The captain did not move. His ID badge still in hand, still extended. The emblem of the nation glinted once more in the failing light. The trigger pulled, one shot. It tore through the silence, cracked against siding, scattered birds from unseen branches. For a moment, the world recoiled, then fell back into stillness. The smell of gunpowder drifted into the cool night air, settling alongside freshly cut grass and asphalt dust. The ID badge dropped first, hitting the pavement with a soft, final sound. The captain's body followed, folding not with violence, but with the slow inevitability of gravity claiming its due. His hand lay open, palm turned upward, empty now. The streetlight flickered again, buzzing, then failed completely. Darkness settled over the scene, broken only by the distant hum of electricity in wires stretched overhead. The officer stood frozen, chest heaving. The gun remained raised, though no further threat existed, no motion remained. The silence was total, thick enough to suffocate, thick enough to mark the weight of what had been done. Curtains in nearby homes stirred. A face appeared at a window, then withdrew. No one opened a door. The street absorbed the violence like soil, taking water. The captain's badge lay inches from his body, catching a shard of distant headlight as the patrol car idled, engine still running. The eagle, globe and anchor glistened for a final moment before the light shifted away. The silence held. It was not peace. It was judgment, and in that silence the system itself revealed its hand. Indifferent, efficient, inevitable. The hospital corridor stretched in sterile lines, white walls broken only by grey doors, and a fire extinguisher recessed into plaster. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, relentless, their glow flattening all shadows, offering no mercy of concealment. The air smelled of antiseptic and cold machinery. Every surface gleamed, as if to deny the human mess within. At the end of the hallway, behind a single closed door, the captain lay. His body had been cleansed of the street's residue, placed on a steel table draped to the chest. The sheet was crisp, tucked with the precision of hospital orderlies, but the dignity it attempted could not disguise the violence that brought him here. His face still, eyes closed, lips parted slightly as if caught between the act of speaking and silence. Beside him on a metal tray lay the objects taken from his pockets. A wallet, keys, a phone cracked at the corner, and the badge, United States Marine Corps Captain, placed carefully atop the leather wallet, its plastic cover reflecting the fluorescent glare above. It shone too brightly, an emblem severed from the hand that once held it. His family stood in the room in silence. A mother whose hands were folded tightly in front of her, as though the act of holding herself together was all that kept her standing. Her father, rigid, staring not at the body but at the ID badge, the object that represented the years of sacrifice. He did not cry. His silence was harder, sharper. A younger brother leaned against the wall, jaw clenched, eyes fixed downward at his shoes, unwilling to lift his gaze into the light. On a chair nearby rested the captain's dress uniform. It had been brought from home in haste, folded neatly, every crease ironed. The blues with their red piping, the ribbons arranged precisely as regulations required. It had been worn in parades, in ceremonies, in the presence of generals. Now it sat inert, waiting for a body that could no longer rise to fill it. The door opened with a soft mechanical click. 2 Pentagon officials entered. Their presence announced not by words, but by the sound of polished leather soles tapping against the hospital tile. Their uniforms were immaculate, pressed blues, polished insignia, posture sharpened to military precision. They carried no weapons, no threat, only the gravity of representation. The family turned. No words were spoken at first. The officials nodded once, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement. They approached the body, stopping just short of the tray where the badge lay. One of them picked it up, turned it in his gloved hand, and set it back down gently. The gesture resembled ritual, as if affirming the object's weight in history, in loyalty, in betrayal. This man was a Marine, the elder official said at last, his voice flat, deliberate. He served his country with honor. His record is impeccable. The words were true. They were also insufficient. The mother's eyes flicked toward the ID badge, then toward the uniform on the chair. Her lips parted but closed again. No protest, no plea, only the weight of recognition that her son's service, his dignity, had been stripped not by enemies abroad, but by suspicion at home. The officials remained still, bearing the silence as if it were a command. They did not offer comfort. They did not offer apology. Their role was not to console, but to witness, to mark that the death of this captain was not merely personal grief, but national consequence. The father stepped forward. He looked at the official, then at the badge. His voice came low, measured. He carried that every day. It should have been enough. No answer was given. The statement required none. It was both indictment and memorial. The younger brother exhaled sharply, his shoes scuffing against tile. He looked at the body, then at the two men, as if demanding more. But he said nothing. The silence of the room weighed too heavily, pressing every person into restraint. The elder official finally spoke again. "This will not be forgotten." It was a promise, though not one of comfort. More a declaration of process, of systemic response. Justice was not in his words. Bureaucracy was. The family withdrew one by one, leaving the room with slow steps. The mother paused at the door, looked back once more at the body, then closed the door behind her with a muted click. The officials remained. One walked to the chair and placed his hand upon the folded uniform, fingers brushing the stiff fabric as though transferring responsibility. The other lifted the ID badge once more, slipping it into an envelope. The sound of paper sealing echoed faintly against the sterile walls. Outside the room, the corridor stretched on, endless under fluorescent light. Nurses moved with quiet efficiency. The tapping of the officials' shoes carried as they walked back down the hallway, their reflections repeating in the polished floor. With each step, the echo of authority grew softer, until only the hum of lights remained. In the room, the captain lay still, flanked by the uniform that would never again be worn, and the badge that had failed to shield him. The hospital absorbed it all without question. White walls, white light, silence. An environment built to preserve life, now reduced to housing death. The system had claimed him, not in the name of war, not in defense of country, but in the flat indifference of a street encounter. His badge could not protect him, his rank could not protect him. The uniform folded on the chair was proof of dignity, but also proof of its futility. And somewhere beyond the hospital's walls, in conference rooms lined with darker wood and heavier silence, men and women in higher office began to weigh what it meant, what must be done, what justice would demand, not for a single man, but for the system that allowed him to fall. The fluorescent lights hummed on. The room was sealed against the world. No windows, no clock. The Pentagon's innermost chambers were designed to eliminate distraction, to trap focus within four walls of reinforced silence. The air was cold, conditioned to precision, humming faintly with the labor of hidden machines. Overhead, recessed lights cast a uniform glow that stripped the room of shadow, as though even ambiguity had been banished. At the center stretched a table, long, polished, heavy. Its lacquered surface reflected the faces of those gathered around it, duplicating them in darker, more distorted forms. The wood carried the weight of decades of decisions, some spoken aloud, others buried beneath classification. Around it, the chairs were pulled back in unison, leather creaking faintly as officials lowered themselves into position. Uniforms and suits alternated around the table. Cross gleamed under the light, eagles, stars, ribbons aligned in immaculate rows. Civilian jackets bore muted pins, the symbols of authority cloaked in restraint. Folders lay closed before them, untouched. The room's silence was measured, rehearsed, each participant aware of its power, each waiting for the first breach. It came not from a general, but from a colonel at the far end, his voice clipped, military in rhythm. Captain Elijah Ward, United States Marine Corps, 10 years of service, Afghanistan, Iraq, commendations for valor, leadership, distinguished conduct. The words landed like the reading of a charge, the cadence steady, unbroken. The repetition of the rank and name was not accidental. Each syllable carried weight, drilling the fact of the man's existence and his erasure into the room. A pause followed. Papers rustled faintly as if to confirm what had been spoken. The polished table reflected their stillness, faces cast downward, lines drawn into the lacquer. Another voice, this time a civilian, calm but edged. He was shot by a local patrolman during a stop, unarmed. Identification in hand, he presented no threat. Silence again. The details were not disputed. They did not need to be. A general leaned forward. the medals on his chest catching the overhead light. His voice was restrained but carried a weight honed from decades of command. An officer of the United States military killed on home soil, not in combat, not by enemies, but by suspicion. We cannot treat this as ordinary. Across the table, a deputy secretary folded his hands. His tone was cooler, bureaucratic. We are not the Department of Justice. This falls under civil jurisdiction. Intervening directly risks precedent. The general's gaze did not move. He repeated slowly, as though carving the words into stone. Captain Elijah Ward, United States Marine Corps. The repetition hung in the air. It was not merely a name, it was a summons, a reminder that the man they spoke of had carried their flag into deserts and returned with honor, only to be gunned down by one sworn to protect the same country. Another official shifted in his seat, his chair legs scraping faintly against the floor. The sound echoed louder than intended, a fracture in the controlled environment. He spoke quickly, as though to cover it. If we escalate this, it will become political theater. Local authorities will push back, accuse us of overreach. The media will let them. The general cut in, voice sharp. The interruption cracked the calm, but only for a moment. Silence rushed back in to smother it. The colonel who had read the record spoke again, softer now. His service file is not just commendable, it is exemplary. A man like this, he is the embodiment of what we tell recruits they can aspire to. And yet, he dies on a sidewalk, mistaken, dismissed. If the uniform cannot protect him, what does that say of the uniform itself? The polished table reflected eyes narrowing, jaws tightening. The weight of the question lingered, heavier than any argument. The deputy secretary broke it carefully, as though stepping across glass. We tread a fine line. Justice is not ours to declare, but neither can we appear indifferent. The question is not if we respond. It is how. Around the table, chairs shifted as bodies leaned back, arms crossed, eyes cast downward. Silence again. Deliberation not in speech, but in posture. Finally, the elder general, silver-haired, eyes sharp beneath heavy brows, spoke with the gravity of command. Restraint is complicity. The badge in his hand was proof of loyalty. It was ignored. If we ignore this now, we declare to every man and woman in uniform that their loyalty ends the moment they step out of fatigues. That is unacceptable. No one challenged him. The silence that followed was not indecision, but assent. It stretched, filled the room, pressed against the polished wood, and the uniforms arrayed around it. At last, the deputy secretary inclined his head, voice measured. Then we agree. A response. Deliberate. Visible. Chairs slid back, leather creaking again in unison. The officials rose, reflections lengthening across the table's sheen. Their silence was its own resolution. Words were unnecessary once direction had been chosen. The folders remained unopened. The decision had not come from data, nor from precedent. It had come from the weight of one name repeated, one badge ignored, one system exposed. As they filed out, their footsteps struck the floor in rhythm, echoing down the corridor beyond the sealed chamber. The polished table was left empty, its surface reflecting only the ceiling lights above, sterile and unblinking. Behind the closed doors, the air still carried the echo of his name, Captain Elijah Ward, United States Marine Corps. The news moved faster than the body. Before the captain was buried, before the last stain of blood was washed from suburban pavement, the story circled the nation. It passed through newswires, tickers, feeds. A black Marine captain, unarmed, shot by a local officer. The words were repeated in headlines, stripped of detail, compressed into a narrative small enough to fit beneath advertisements. The police department was first to respond. A press room hastily prepared, walls washed in dull municipal beige. A podium stood at the center, seal of the city affixed to its face. Behind it, an officer in uniform unfolded a statement from a sheet of paper, eyes lowered, voice flat. "We regret the incident that occurred. An investigation is underway. Our officer feared for his safety. We ask the public for patience." Each phrase was an echo of statements delivered countless times before, bureaucratic language devoid of marrow. The words were read as if they belonged to no one, as if responsibility were airdropped into the void. Cameras flashed, capturing the scripted detachment. In the front row, journalists scribbled, but their faces betrayed no surprise. They had heard it all before, in different rooms, under different seals. Microphones sprouted from the podium like a cluster of black barrels, aimed not to kill, but to record the ritual of evasion. When the officer folded the paper and stepped back, silence lingered. Questions rose, shouted, overlapping, but he walked away, leaving the microphones to hang in unanswered expectancy. The spectacle was over. The script had been fulfilled. 2 days later, another room, this one draped in flags, the Pentagon seal heavy behind the podium. The difference was immediate. Crisp uniforms stood at the edges, shoulders square, eyes forward. Cameras clicked in rapid fire, their light bursts illuminating the blue fabric of the backdrop. A general approached the podium. He carried no paper. His hands gripped the lectern, firm, deliberate. His voice, when it came, was not measured in bureaucratic cadence, but sharpened to command. Captain Elijah Ward served this country with honor. He led Marines in combat. He was decorated for valor. He came home to the nation he defended and was killed unarmed on its streets. This is not acceptable. This will not be forgotten. The words struck with the force of artillery, direct, uncloaked. Cameras flared, capturing his jaw set firm, his eyes unflinching. He spoke only those few sentences, then stepped back. No apology, no legal hedging. Outrage clear and precise. The silence after his words was heavier than the sound itself. The contrast between the two statements spread across screens. The local podium of evasion, the national podium of fury. Commentators dissected tone, posture, diction. They played the clips side by side, one officer reading from a page, another speaking as if carving truth into stone. But the family refused spectacle. When approached by networks, they stood behind a folded American flag laid across a table in their living room. They did not speak. Cameras recorded their silence, the mother's hand resting on the cloth, the father's eyes fixed on the emblem. It was enough. Their refusal to join the noise became its own statement, more powerful than any interview. Protests began outside government buildings, not with chants, but with stillness. Crowds gathered, candles in hand, faces set toward the doors of power. The silence of the protests mirrored the silence of the captain's last moments, echoed the silence of his family before the flag. News crews circled, unsettled by the absence of slogans, of voices to capture. Yet the images spread. Rows of people standing motionless, flames flickering in paper cups, their silence louder than any demand. Inside press rooms, the microphones multiplied. Each new briefing sprouted more black stems, more clustered heads, as if preparing for battle. Journalists pressed harder, their questions sharp. Will the officer be charged? What does this say about systemic bias? What measures will be taken? Local officials dodged. Repeating investigations were ongoing, procedures followed. Their words drained of blood before reaching ears. The Pentagon, when pressed, gave no details of action, only repetition. Captain Elijah Ward, United States Marine Corps. The name was their answer, their invocation, their judgment. In living rooms, families watched. In barracks, Marines watched. The image of the captain's folded uniform, his badge, his silence, all replayed through screens. For some, it was grief. For others, fury. For all, it was exposure. The system revealed, masks slipping, words weighed against silence. The spectacle grew. But beneath it lay the truth, one life extinguished, one badge disregarded, one nation forced to look into its reflection, distorted under fluorescent light and camera flashes, and in every press room, amid every cluster of microphones, amid every flag folded for display, the question hung unspoken, heavier than any word uttered aloud. What would justice demand? The courthouse stood like a fortress of stone and glass, its steps wide enough to carry the weight of history, its pillars designed to suggest permanence. Outside, the air was heavy with silence. Protesters filled the plaza, candles in hand, their flames trembling against the wind. They did not chant. They did not shout. Their stillness was their weapon, their silence heavier than noise. A single banner lay propped against the steps. Captain Elijah Ward, United States Marine Corps, nothing more. Inside, the air shifted from the chill of evening into the dryness of bureaucracy. Marble walls reflected the sound of shoes striking against them, the echo of every step magnified. Security checks clicked and buzzed. Metal detectors hummed. The machinery of justice moved with practiced ritual. The courtroom itself was stark. Wooden benches lined in rows, polished smooth by decades of use. At the front, the judge's bench rose above all else, gavel resting idle but visible, a symbol of authority waiting to be exercised. The sound of its striking wood would carry like a shot, echoing through every corner. At the center, facing one another, two tables. One for the defense, one for the prosecution. Papers stacked, pens aligned, bottles of water uncapped but untouched. The defense attorney sat stiff, lips pressed thin, his client beside him, the officer. Uniform absent, suit ill-fitted, eyes flickering downward. He looked smaller than the headlines suggested, his hands clasped tight, fingers pale from pressure. The prosecution's side held more than lawyers. It held presence. The folded dress uniform of Captain Ward lay across a table, displayed not as evidence, but as testimony. Its blue fabric, red piping and ribbons shone under the courtroom lights. It did not speak, but it carried more weight than any argument. When the session opened, the gavel struck once. The sound reverberated like a gunshot, pulling all eyes forward. The judge's voice was measured, deliberate. Proceed. Witnesses came and went. Local officials recited procedure, their words hedged cautious. The police chief testified with practiced deflection, insisting the officer followed training, his voice tight, his eyes darting. But beneath the cadence of bureaucracy, the room heard only avoidance. Then the Pentagon's witness entered. A general, his uniform immaculate, medals aligned with surgical precision. His shoes clicked against the floor, echoing louder than expected in the hushed chamber. When he reached the stand, silence fell deeper still. He took the oath without hesitation, his hand steady, his gaze unbroken. The prosecutor's question was simple. "General, what do you know of Captain Elijah Ward?" The answer came as if read from scripture. He was a Marine, a leader. A man who carried his unit through fire, who put himself in harm's way for those he commanded. His loyalty was unquestioned. His service was decorated. His record was spotless. The words filled the courtroom, pressing against the wood, the marble, the silence. "And what do you know of the circumstances of his death?" The general's jaw tightened. He spoke with restraint, each word precise. He was unarmed. He was compliant. He held his identification in his hand, a badge of loyalty to this nation. It was ignored. He was shot by one who saw not his rank, not his service, but only his skin. The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the defense attorney looked downward, his pen idle in his hand. The officer shifted, his shoulders collapsing inward, as though the air itself had turned hostile. The judge's gavel struck once to break the stillness, but the echo only deepened the weight of the words already spoken. Outside, the protests continued. Candles multiplied as night fell. Thousands stood shoulder to shoulder, faces illuminated by small flames, their silence binding them together. The courthouse loomed above them, every window glowing against the dark sky, as though judgment itself were on display. State officials attempted to posture, issuing statements about respecting due process, about balancing federal overreach. Their words dissipated before reaching ears. The silence of the crowds, the testimony within the courtroom, the uniform displayed, all spoke louder than press releases. Day after day, the machinery of justice creaked forward. Motions filed, objections raised, rulings handed down. Each gavel strike echoed like another gunshot, another reminder of the first. The officer sat hunched, shrinking further with each passing day, his posture unraveling as though gravity itself bore down heavier on him than on anyone else in the room. The folded uniform never moved. It remained at the center of the courtroom's vision, cloth and thread carrying more dignity than the man in the defendant's chair. Its presence was undeniable. Captain Ward was still here, still watching, still demanding judgment. The protests did not wane. Each night the plaza filled, candles lit, silence unbroken. Reporters circled, cameras captured, but no one attempted to speak for them. The silence spoke for itself. It said, "We will not forget." When the general stepped down from the witness stand, he paused at the prosecution's table. His hand brushed the folded uniform lightly, almost reverently, before he returned to his seat. The gesture was not noted in transcripts, but everyone in the room saw it. It was not protocol. It was oath. The gavel struck again, marking adjournment. The echo carried through the chamber, out into the marble halls, down to the protesters standing in silence. The machinery of justice moved slowly, but it was moving. And with each turn of its gears, with each testimony, each candle, each silence, the inevitability grew heavier, harder to resist. The nation had been called to witness, and there was no turning away. The room was crowded, though no one spoke above a murmur. Rows of chairs filled with officials, officers and civilians, their postures stiff beneath the weight of ceremony. At the front stood a table, bare except for a single object placed at its center, the badge. It gleamed faintly under recessed lights, its metal worn at the edges from years of contact, its surface reflecting faces that leaned forward to see it. Once a mark of authority, it now lay inert, stripped of power, reduced to evidence. The officer who once carried it stood to the side, flanked by guards. His suit hung loose around his frame, his eyes unfocused, hands clasped as if holding himself upright required effort. No uniform adorned him now, no weapon at his side. His silence was not dignified. It was hollow. The presiding official lifted the badge from the table. His voice carried through the chamber, steady, precise. "This emblem of service is hereby revoked. Its bearer is stripped of authority, and its misuse recorded in the annals of this nation's failures." The badge was set back down, the sound of metal against wood sharp, final. The echo spread, lingered, then dissolved into silence. It was not vengeance. It was judgment. At Arlington the air was different, cleaner, sharper, edged with autumn wind. Rows of white headstones stretched across the hills in disciplined order, a formation of silence, each name a fragment of sacrifice. Beneath the sky, flags stirred softly, their fabric snapping faintly like whispers. The procession moved with precision. Marines in dress blues bore the casket, their steps synchronized, their faces stone. The folded flag lay across the wood, its stars stark against navy, its edges tucked with ceremonial care. They carried him to the place prepared. The earth there was fresh, soil dark against trimmed grass. The casket was lowered, ropes sliding with slow inevitability. The flag was lifted, folded, creased with exacting geometry, until only a triangle remained, its stars aligned. In the distance, rifles fired in unison. The cracks echoed through the grounds, rolling across the fields of stone. Each shot reverberated like an answer to the first gunshot on that suburban street. Echo for echo, but this time transformed, not violence, but honor. Silence followed. The eternal flame at the memorial burned steady, unbroken by wind. Its constancy threw into relief the fragility of flesh, the impermanence of bodies. Yet it burned, a promise that memory would not be extinguished. The general who had testified in court stepped forward. His voice was low, carrying over the rows of gathered Marines, officials, and family. "Captain Elijah Ward, United States Marine Corps. Your name is entered into the roll of honor, not only for the battles you fought abroad, but for the truth your death has laid bare here at home." The words were deliberate, carved into the air with the same weight they would one day carry on stone. The mother received the folded flag. She held it to her chest, her hands trembling, but her face set firm. The father stood beside her, shoulders rigid, his gaze fixed on the flame in the distance. The younger brother lowered his head, his silence deeper than words. Marines saluted in unison, hands rising, palms rigid, the gesture cutting the air clean. The sound of boots shifting echoed faintly against the stone walkways. Every movement was ritual, every silence intentional, and yet beyond the precision, beyond the order, lay the wound. One man honored, one man buried, but a nation exposed. His death was not war's casualty, not accident, but the product of suspicion embedded in the very soil he defended. The marble headstones stretched outward, marking service across generations. His among them now, his story distinct, his injustice carved into the collective memory, whether the nation wished it or not. The crowd dispersed slowly, shoes tapping against stone, voices hushed. The flame burned on, indifferent, eternal. At the end, the sight was quiet. A fresh grave among many, a folded flag clutched against the chest of a grieving mother, a name newly spoken in the litany of honor. Justice had been delivered. But justice was not wholeness. It could not restore breath, could not erase the silence of a suburban street, could not lift the weight from a nation's conscience. It could only mark, record, and declare Captain Elijah Ward, United States Marine Corps, his name now bound to both service and scar. The system had confronted itself, but the wound remained, visible, undeniable, carried forward into the next room, the next decision, the next silence. And as the eternal flame burned against the dusk, the truth settled like ash in the air. Justice could punish, but it could not heal.